Welcome to Below the Line, where we talk about working in Hollywood from the crew perspective. My name is Skid. I'm a former assistant director and your host.
Quiet on the set.
Today we're talking about Zero Day, the 6-episode political thriller starring Robert De Niro that's currently streaming on Netflix. We're going to focus on score, and I'm happy to host returning guest Jeff Russo. Jeff, welcome back to Below the Line.
Thank you for having me.
Co-hosting with me once again is composer and recording artist Louis Weeks. Louis, glad you could join us.
Hey, Skid. Hey, Jeff. Good to see you guys.
Good to see you too.
Now, a warning for listeners, today's conversation will contain spoilers for the show, so go check it out, come back and join us. Jeff, I want to set up my first question with a callback. About a year ago, for new listeners, I'm referencing season 19, episode 6 of this podcast. We talked about your work on Ripley, another limited series that aired on Netflix. Now, you shared at that time that Steve Zaillian, the creator and director of that show, brought you in when the project was still in the conceptual phase. And my takeaway from that conversation was that your early involvement, combined with the fact that you had previously collaborated with Steve, it greatly informed your work on Ripley. Now, with that project as a data point for comparison, how did you get involved with Zero Day?
It's interesting, all projects are different. So there's really no way to make comparisons that are reasonable, or relevant. I worked 2 years ago on a show called Love and Death that was directed by Leslie Linkeglatter. And after I was done with Ripley, I saw Leslie at, I don't remember where I saw her. I ran into her and we started talking about what she was about to embark on. She was about to start shooting Zero Day. And, that sounds like a really interesting project. I'd love to, throw my hat in the ring, like if you're looking for composer as early as this is. And she said, you should have a meeting with Eric Newman, who's, Eric is he's the writer, creator, showrunner. So that meeting got set up, I don't know, about maybe a month later. And I started talking with Eric about the sound of the show. And we just sort of hit it off. It was actually quite funny. Like my first conversation with Eric, he was on a beach in the South Pacific or something. He was on vacation. And I was like, oh, it must be nice to be on a beach. And he's like, it is. And he took a photo and it was like, it's a standard foot shot looking at the water kind of thing. And we started talking about it. So yeah, I got brought in early, not quite as early as I did with Ripley or with some other projects that I typically come in early on. When I work with Noah Hawley, he brings me in super early as well, sending me, original script ideas, and I start sort of formulating a plan and writing themes. In this particular case, I did wait until I saw a rough cut of the first episode to start understanding what the show was going to be and how the show was going to feel. So it was a little bit later in the process. I started writing for Zero Day last June, right after the time that I had spoken to you about Ripley, I think. And, that process expanded and I worked on it from about June to December of this last, a couple months ago. And it wasn't the same type of process that Ripley was, where I was writing a bunch of music and Steve was saying, yeah, this is really great. This is working. I'm not really feeling this yet. Like, how do we make this more this or less that? Whereas this, I was actually more like writing to picture and really seeing what the show was looking like as I was creating the score.
Now, a follow-up, and you mentioned a couple of names there. Leslie Linkeglatter directed all 6 episodes.
Yes.
Well known for her work on Homeland, the current president of the DGA, a storied career.
Yeah.
And you also mentioned Eric Newman, who, as you said, the showrunner and show creator. There's a lot of people in the credits at this. And so I'm curious, as you're going through, where is the creative center of gravity? Is that something that they sort out, or again, just how you fit into this collaboration?
It is something that they sort out. Like, the way it started was I was talking a lot with Leslie as she was directing. And then in her edit of the show, I was talking a lot with her. And then as the edits go from director's cut to producer's cut to network cut to studio cut, there's a whole bunch of different cuts going on. I start having creative conversations with different people. Typically, the showrunner in television, miniseries, and in long form uh, typically the showrunner is the sort of creative center of gravity. So once Eric got his hands on the cuts, my conversations creatively and in what direction we were taking the score really focused on my conversations with him. I think Netflix had thoughts obviously about what the music was. I don't really talk directly to them. They sort of confer with Eric, or any showrunner for that matter, and then Eric and or showrunners talk to me saying, okay, we want to do this here, we want to do that there. That's how that typically works.
I'd love to talk about that first episode when you first got the cut and you looked at it for the first time. Could you talk us through kind of the process of trial and error and what maybe unlocked the music for you? Was there a moment or a kind of particular direction that you found when going through that first episode that set the template for the rest of the series?
There's two pieces of music that really did set it for me. And that was the second piece of music in the series that you hear. The first piece of music, the whole thing is like a flash forward, right? We open on a flash forward, and then the series actually begins 3 days prior to what we're seeing. That first cue was very indicative of what I was going to do from a sound design standpoint, like a score sound design, like how to treat the moment that Mullen is having his mental. I want, it's not breakdown, but having his mental sort of
Right.
operation. But the two most important cues I think that really set the tone for me, in terms of what the thematic motif was going to be, was when we see Mullen wake up that first morning, and the entire sequence of him getting up, looking in the mirror, prepping, going on a run, doing his laps in the pool, like having his sort of typical ex-president morning. I think that piece of music sort of set that tone. And because we go back to that moment a number of times in the show, we go back to the moment of him waking up and sort of having the beginning of his day. And then there's the piece of music that is after Roger convinces him to go to Washington, D.C. to meet with the president. There's that entire sequence, which takes us from the moment he gets in the car to getting to DC, seeing the president, and then going to the CIA. Like I treated that as sort of one big sequence. There isn't music across the entire thing, but it was all related. And I think that those two things were the things that were my jumping off points for all of the elements that lead up to like either tension or action or deliberate action and or emotion.
I forget where I heard it, and at the risk of misattributing it to the wrong person, I'll just, kind of leave it there. But an author was asked, what's the difference between an action and a thriller? And the response was, a thriller has the president in it. And I bring this up because there's so many aspects of this series that I think are kind of cross genre. It has a political thriller, it has action moments, but there's also it's a chamber piece. It's a family drama too. It's a psychological drama. I'm wondering musically, what were the ways that you you leaned into those genre expectations and also maybe subverted them and kind of zigged instead of zagging? Does that go through your mind when you're evaluating the music for a series like this?
You know, I've said this a lot. Like, I typically only really like to play what characters are feeling, not what characters are doing. So the idea of action music is sort of counter to what I like to do. I don't consider this to be an action thriller. Yes, there's some moments of tense sort of things that are going on. They're driving somewhere, but that's not action. Yeah, there's the moment when they take Dan Stevens' character out of his house in episode 3. Is that an action piece? Like, yeah, I guess, but not really. I'm playing the underlying tension and fear of those scenes. So I definitely consider this to be a drama thriller. Like, there is family drama, but there's that more thriller aspect. And to me, thriller is just tension release, right?
Right.
Action, on the other hand, I think it does sort of elicit a feeling that there's going to be like, things happening all the time. And, I feel like I leave that to like Mission Impossible,
Yeah.
like where they count on these huge action set pieces to really be a part of the be a part of the entertainment factor. And I mean, I love those movies and I love that type of filmmaking. This I don't think is that at all. This is way more of an emotional psychological thriller, where you don't really know what's going to happen and they're on a hunt to find the answer. But remember that even in finding the answer, I'm not sure anything is solved, right? It leaves you sort of wondering, like, oh, so yes, they found the answer, but there's now, because we found the answer, there are all these other problems. And we don't address them because that's the end of the show.
Right.
So that leads me to the whole sort of, it's way more of a drama, way more of a thriller component. I did have to, write pieces of music that did tip the music's hat to what was happening on screen. But again, trying to hold back and trying to really play the fear and the underlying emotional content rather than what you're seeing on screen is how I like to go about doing things.
Jeff, I want to follow up on that idea of, like you said, what the characters are thinking. Because I feel like one of the central ambiguities of the show is the state of President Mullen's mind. There's just the ambiguity around, is he having an episode or something being done to him? How does score tie into that?
I certainly don't pay attention to the question as to what's happening. I only have to acknowledge the fact that something is happening, right? So he doesn't know. He's not thinking about that. He's having a moment that he believes to be real, right? So he's hearing that song. He's seeing the face of the writer. He's having these moments where he can't trust his own mind. He doesn't know if he can trust his own mind. And I need to play into that. So that's really all I was trying to do. All I was trying to do was play how he was feeling at that moment. And that is untethered. That is unsure of himself, unsure of his surroundings. And with that, there's fear. So I think like that was my main goal for those moments.
One of the most successful parts, I think, of the score's relationship to the story is in those moments where I feel like the music is truly externalizing what President Mullen is feeling inside. And I think one of the successes also the series as a whole is that it really, really uses De Niro's old school movie star ability to be still and to let the camera and the music, most importantly, do the work. To me, that's kind of the difference between functionally like movie star and actor. Like, what is an actor doing on screen versus what is a movie star doing on screen? And movie star is taking up the full screen and allowing to be like a projection of the music and the all of the extra production elements that typically people don't think of as acting, but kind of they know how to dance around that. Are those spaces that you're looking for as you're going through, kind of watching, okay, where is Bobby going totally still and I can let the music pop through? Or is that kind of implicit? Or is that an explicit part of your process?
I actually never really thought about that. I feel like I have a relationship with the picture, and my relationship with the picture is I see something happen and I'm going to react to it. How that affects what I write in a given moment is really about what I'm seeing and how it's affecting me in that moment. I don't think I look much deeper than that. So it isn't about whether something is implicit or explicit. It's like I'm wondering like how is this character feeling right now? How would I feel in that same situation? How do I then translate that into a musical feeling? Do you know what I mean? Like
Of
it's
course, yeah.
sort of way more cerebral than I think what you're describing. Like I think, it's not a conscious choice. It's not a conscious effort for me to sort of look at how an actor, in this particular case, one of the greatest actors of our time, is actually moving through the film and how that will affect what I'm doing. I feel like it's a little more cerebral than that.
Yeah. I feel like I know how you're going to answer this next question, but I'm curious to see what you say. Um, Dan Stevens is a actor that you've probably watched on screen quite a lot because of the amazing work that you've done with Legion. And I'm curious, do you feel like there's a part of you that understands inherently, like having worked to the image of Dan Stevens before, okay, this is how Q will work with this type of actor? Or do you, because you've had so much experience, composing to his performances in Legion, does that somehow inform, when you see him in scenes in Zero Day?
I would say it's opposite of that. I would say
Okay.
part of my job is to make sure that I don't do that, right? Like
Hmm.
I definitely don't want to react in a specific way simply because I've had the experience with looking at this actor on screen before. And you are indeed right. I had a very specific experience doing that with Legion. That character is insular, right? Compared to what he is in Zero Day. So I have to be actually quite cognizant of that. Like I don't want to fall into into that trap, so to speak, of, like being used to what somebody does. And I'm like, oh yeah, if I do this, like that'll really work here because I did that before. I don't want to do that. I'm treating all the characters as individuals. And by the way, he's a spectacular actor. So,
Hmm.
seeing him in Zero Day versus seeing him in Legion, they were very, very, very different characters. And he's like a different human being. He's just different. He's just different. So I would say that that makes my job somehow easier as well.
No, that makes total sense.
If I've got a question about how score integrates with sound design, and in watching this, there's two elements, and it might be the same answer, it might be different cases. Where the first is you referenced it, the constant callback to the Sex Pistols, "Who Killed Bambi," which is actually a plot point of the stories that he's hearing it. And in a similar vein, although again maybe different approach, they use a lot of static noise to indicate when Mullen's having issues. And so in working on score for these scenes, are you responding to what they're doing, or are you somehow informing how they're going to use those parts?
Well, a lot of what you hear when he's having that moment is certainly a mix of things, but I designed a sound for those moments. And that static thing that you hear, I'm pretty sure is from my score and not from sound design. They did a lot of building of sound beds as well. And I think that on the dub stage, they definitely figured out what was going to be working the best in those moments. So I did not get to hear that stuff prior to it being mixed on the dub stage. It's like I did what I did, they did what they did, and then they figured it out on the dub stage.
I'm curious about how you go about creating the roadmap for sound design as a whole, especially in a score like this one, which has these hybrid elements where Skid just brought up a question about was the sound design, was the score, and the fact that we can't tell in some moments is a pretty unique thing. But then also there are a lot of acoustic elements. What's your process in terms of going through thinking about if it's going to be a hybrid score, how do I incorporate some elements of electronics, or how do I record acoustic instruments to make it all feel like it's working together? Because I feel like from a production standpoint, those details can either help glue together a score or make them feel like the electronic stuff is one world and the acoustic stuff is another world. And what's your process like in terms of designing the overall sound so that it all kind of fits together?
A lot of it is just sort of finding my way around the room in the dark. You know what I mean? A lot of it is just like, is this going to work? Well, let's see. And does this work? And does this sound work? And okay, I know that I'm going to do the orchestra here, or maybe have a solo cello here or something. I think that a lot of it is trial and error. Not like I sit down with a pen and paper prior to going to a score and saying, okay, like I know I want to do X here and Y here, and let's see if they work together. I just sort of move forward in the creation of something. And I'm a firm believer in the idea that if it sounds good, it must be good. So I know that I typically use like orchestral instrumentation for more emotional content, and I use more electronic instrumentation for more tension and certainly thriller moments, and certainly, you know, elevated reality moments. But I do cross those streams all the time. You know, orchestral instruments can be used for tension a lot, and I do a mix of those things. In this particular show, I knew it was just going to be a crossbred score the whole time, you know, because I knew I had this sort of idea that there's an electronic element to the story, and I wanted that to be a part of the score, but there is also all this underlying emotional strife that I really wanted to I really wanted to represent with melody, and I really wanted to represent with, warm feelings from the orchestra. Strings and winds particularly do a good job at that. So I don't really sit down and pay attention to uh, what that is. I just sort of move forward through it.
Was there a part of this whole process that you felt like was the most joyful to be composing for you? Is there an aspect that you can pinpoint that's like I was having the most fun doing this particular work on this score?
Huh. No, there wasn't one moment. I mean, my favorite moments of any score are the very beginning, when I sit down to figure out what it is. What's the score? What's the motif? What's the melody? What's the sound? What's the idea? So I would say when I sat down to really think about what this score would be, that was my favorite part. That's where I get the most excitement. The second is recording the score with an orchestra, which to me is the sort of culmination of the creation of something, and then I can really hear what it's going to be. Now, granted, I make mock-ups with samples and all kinds of stuff because people need to know what they're getting before they have it.
Right.
That's part of the fun, but it's not as much fun. So, the creation of the score at the very beginning is the most thrilling and probably the most fulfilling part of the process.
So when you are in the beginning of that process, when you are searching around the dark room, do you feel like you are what you were looking for while you were composing it was instrument specific? In other words, would you know it when you heard it on the specific instrument? Or was it the kind of thing where you could sit down at a piano or a guitar or and convey the melodic and harmonic information the way you wanted to? And I ask because as a composer working in media, I'm really always struggling with how much of my ideas can be distilled down to, can I sit at the piano and convey this versus do I need to actually get my hands into the specific sound, the specific sample to unlock the idea that I'm trying to unlock?
I mean, it's different for everything, right? I think that typically when I'm thinking about emotional content, I would want to be able to hear a melody in my head and play it. When it comes to the rest of it, it may be either one of those things. Like I've written
Hmm.
scores that you could never sit down on a piano and play. And you did, you'd be like, what's that? Like the whole idea of the score was this one sound. The main theme of a particular score might be a sound, not a melody, right? Or it might be a chord. And you could never really truly express that just by sitting down at a keyboard and playing it. There are scores that I've written that are very much that, where I would sit down and play three notes and you might go, oh, I know that. Like, I know that. That's that thing, or I would say that. I don't really require that. I don't have a specific rule book that I go by when creating a score. I sit down and just try a lot of different things. And whatever works, works. You know what I mean? Like that's why I say
Yeah.
if it sounds good, it must be good to me. So if I'm fucking around with a synth and I hit some weird thing, I'm like, oh yeah, that's pretty cool. Like what I was doing for the sound for Mullen, for instance, I used this thing called an omnichord, and I put the omnichord through my entire pedal board, and I went through like a single note on the omnichord, and I sort of turned pedals on and off and combinations of pedals on and off until I hit one thing. I was like, oh, that's cool. And then all of a sudden I was like, okay, I just need to remember what that is. That's a combination of this one, and this one with this note on this thing. And now I have my sound for when Mullen goes into one of these sort of mental breaks. And every time that happened, I turned on those things, hit the one note, and it did its own thing. And there's a reverse part of it, and then there's some static. And to me, I guess what I could do is if you were here at the studio, I could turn all that stuff on, hit the one note, and you might go, oh, yeah, that's Mullen. That's not playable on a piano. That's not a melody.
Right.
That's not a thing.
Right.
You would recognize that as the motif that happens. So I don't close myself off to think like I have to have it be able to be distilled to one thing. Like the score is the score is the score, right? And
Hmm.
if I can bring you back to a feeling with a sound more than a melody, then it's the same job, right? It's the same thing. So I'm not really trying to be able to distill it. What I'm trying to do is grab the hand of the viewer and take them on the journey with me, you know, and that idea can be across any one. Some can be distilled down, some can't be. Some is just a sound. Some is like, the sound of a piece of metal against a cup, and that to me is the most exciting thing about what we do. That's the most exciting thing about what we do because we're not confined to using only something that you can distill down, only something that's memorable. Some filmmakers are like, it has to be memorable for it to work. Okay, so then I sort of write from that perspective. Some filmmakers are like, I don't want any melody at all. No melody. And I'm like, okay, like I got to figure out how to do it without any melody because I know what the job is. I know that I'm supposed to grab the hand of the viewer and help them along, not tell the story for them, but allow them to experience the story the way the filmmaker wants them to be able to experience the story. I know this is a pretty long-winded answer for your question, but I really believe like the fact that I start out by feeling around in the dark is just a fact of everything that I do. It's everything that I do. I start with no idea with what I'm doing, and then all of a sudden I have an idea, and that can sometimes be distilled down to a melody and or a piano and or some way to express it to you simply, and sometimes it cannot be.
I think it's a beautiful answer. I mean, to me, I think what's so interesting about that approach is that it allows a lot of room for the unexpected, which is, I think, a very artful way to approach a process that I think oftentimes I have heard and seen firsthand has a lot of rigid requirements on process. I know a lot of composers, and I myself sometimes do this, where there is a tendency to systematize what we do, and maybe even templatize what we do, because it will really help when we get into revision 55, and all of these notes are really killing us, and we have to make sure that we just change that one thing. We can isolate out that one thing and change it. But if you're dealing with a system that has a lot of chaos in it, has a lot of like unknowns, you press a button, you don't know what's going to happen. It's just kind of the art of it. Has that come up? You say like, sorry, like I don't think I can edit that sound. That's just what it's doing, and either we like it or we don't, and we can't really like iterate on it because it's just kind of what the cosmos spit out.
So you bring up a very good point. First of all, in episodic television, even if it's 6 episodes or 10 episodes or whatever, you can't work within total chaos. It can't be done because you'll never finish. You'll never get there. So there is an element of that. Now, I can choose to work in it with an element of chaos with filmmakers that I know trust me.
Mm-hmm.
There's a big difference between working with a filmmaker who knows you and trusts your process and trusts what you do, and someone who does not trust the process. Like I've worked with filmmakers who just simply don't trust the process. They want to have they need to make changes to every little thing in order to feel comfortable in the process. And that's a process that we all have to deal with sometimes. Like some people just work that way. In those moments, yes, it has to be rigid. I have to be able to say anything I do and deliver to this person, I have to be able to undo, fix, change, and deliver back in a different way. So I can't work in a chaotic environment. Some filmmakers are the opposite of that. I've been and I'm going to accentuate the word very fortunate to work with filmmakers who believe in me and trust me. Noah Hawley trusts me to deliver to him what he's going to want. And I can allow myself to be in that sort of chaotic world because I know, like, sure, I've delivered to him stuff that he was like, I don't hear it. Can you explain it to me? Or because this isn't working for me and I want to understand what you're thinking. And we've had conversations, and sometimes those pieces of music somehow end up in the show or they don't. Steve's Alien, it was the same thing. Like, here is a person who trusted me to deliver to him stuff that he could then try to figure out how he wanted to use. But he trusted the process. Alex Kurtzman is kind of the same way, where he really believes in my ability to deliver to him what he wants. So in those projects where I'm working with filmmakers that I'm truly connected with on that level and truly trust not just me, but trust the entire process, it's possible to live in a chaotic creative environment and not have to worry about, can I roll back and undo the thing that I created by, touching
Yep.
all those knobs over there and turning them, and, in a way that I could absolutely never recreate in 1,000 years, even if I took video, like, analog equipment, like you make a little turn and it's going to be literally different every single time. So, in the last season of Fargo, I used that big Moog synth a lot, and I did for Legion as well. And yeah, they did two totally different things. And I never redid that. I could edit it, but I couldn't undo it and change it slightly. Like, it was going to be what it was going to be. The thing about that is the belief in the trust system in the filmmaking process, because the filmmaking is a collaborative effort no matter what, right? And so much of that collaboration requires trust between artists. And, I started my career in a rock band where me and Emerson, who is the singer of the band, had to trust one another in what we both did in the band in order for it to flourish. I approach writing scores in the same way. It's like me and the filmmaker, we're a band. It's like we're a band, and we're both working towards the same goal, telling the story. In one situation, we're writing songs, and we're telling the story via songwriting, and get to emote that ourselves. Whereas in filmmaking, we're telling a story with different tools, and that to me is very important part of the process, because I really enjoy the chaotic environment. The chaos inside the creative environment is really important to be able to come up with something that is inspiring.
I think maybe a lot of our listeners might hear chaos and immediately think that it's a bad thing. I think you and I understand that what we're talking about is definitely not pejorative. It's kind of freeing. Like it's the goal.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely not pejorative. It's definitely what I mean about chaos is the idea of the unknown, right? There's something unknown about it. I'm sitting down, I'm turning a thing, I have no idea what is going to happen. And when something happens that is really great, it's like trying to capture lightning in a bottle, right? Like, that's the chaos that I'm talking about. I'm not talking about running around the studio with my hair, standing straight up, going, dude. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the idea of controlled chaos, obviously.
I mean, that's a good lesson for the podcast too. I think that we don't know where these questions are going to go. Jeff, easy to go out on that, but I do want to ask if there are specific scenes or cues that we want to put a spotlight on, where whether it was the challenge or you think you're doing heavy lifting or very quiet lifting. In other words, that we want to draw people's attention to. Anything specific favorites that you can recall from this one?
I mean, yes. The opening cue, not opening, but the second cue on the soundtrack, which is Morning Routine, and how that particular piece develops over the entirety of the score, and the very end cue, which is basically, I think I call it a new day. And again, it's one of the unfortunate parts of being on Netflix as a platform is when you get into the end credits, they reduce it down. They want you to watch the next thing, and it's like I'm not complaining about it, but from an artist point of view, it's like my part in telling the end of that story was it went from that into the end credits, and the story that I'm telling musically continues through the end credits, and that piece of music was really important to me in order to really effectively represent Mullen's state of mind after he literally sold his daughter down, you know, like she turned herself in and he made a choice. His wife has now left, or at least that's what he thinks, and that's what we're left to believe at the end. I know this is not supposed to be a spoiler-free
spoil away.
Right. So how he is emotionally feeling at that moment, like what he's experiencing. And so those two pieces of music, I mean, look, it was all important to me, but those two are really indicative of what I was trying to emote for the show.
Kind of reminds me of the musical equivalent of when something visual is ported over to a different platform and the aspect ratio changes, and so all of a sudden there's a gag off screen that you can't see.
You don't see it.
Yeah. We'll make sure to go listen to the full journey on the end credits. So
I mean, it's, you know, again, it really was my way of extending the story past Black, right? And I don't really typically get a chance to do that. And I had the chance to just start this piece of music, start his journey into the next day, right? 0 day plus 29 or whatever it was, and tell the rest of that story. I mean, that may also all happen inside my head, but you know, that is what I intended to do.
Well, listeners, we're going to encourage you to go back and watch the credits if you didn't already. I'm going to encourage you to stay through the credits on the podcast as well. But, you know, on that note, we'll call it a wrap. Jeff, there's a lot of fun having you here. Thanks so much.
Man, thank you for having me. It's always an interesting conversation.
yeah, thank you.
Listeners, I always appreciate your feedback. You'll find my contact info on our website, belowtheline1word.biz. That's B-I-Z. You'll also find past episodes and links to all of our social media, so please visit. Jeff, where next are we going to hear your work?
There's a film coming out called The Last Rodeo that was directed by John Avnet. I finished back in October. That's coming out, I think, in May. And then Alien, we're in the middle of that right now. I've recorded most of the music. I'm going back to record the rest of it in April. And I have a spotting session at 2:00 today for episode 6 or 7. We are deep into it, and it is as good as I hope you all think it is going to be.
Oh, I am putting a pin in that, Jeff. I hope you'll come back around and talk about that one. I'm really looking forward to that.
A lot of fun stuff to talk about with that one.
Oh yeah, sounds awesome.
Now, Louie, I'm aware you've also got a shout out. Please share.
Did some work with my colleague and friend Jay Wadley on the upcoming The Wedding Banquet.
I've met Jay. Good guy, like Jay.
Jay's the best. Yeah, we had a lot of fun working together. The Wedding Banquet should be out, I think, in the spring, I think April. So hope everyone gets a chance to see it. It's a great film.
Fantastic.
My closing credits, thanks to Curtis Five for our music, John Wan for our logo, and to all of our listeners, I appreciate you. The Below the Line logo is available on t-shirts, mugs, and stickers at redbubble.com. Nobody's bought a t-shirt in a while, so I don't know. If you send me a picture of yourself in a Below the Line t-shirt, I'll thank you by name on the show. The other ways you can help is first to give us a positive rating wherever you get your podcasts, and even more importantly, tell your friends, and that's how we find new listeners. All of that aside, whatever your engagement, the fact that you're still listening means a lot to me. Thanks again from Below the Line.